Welcome, everybody. Thank you for coming together to discuss a very important issue. As most of you know, the FCC has released their updated broadband maps, and those and the data contained therein will be really critical to allocating the state's funding. So we wanted to bring you all together to have the California Public Utilities Commission, who is the state's designated broadband data mapping entity, walk through and give an informational webinar on the details of the mapping and to answer any questions you might have that we have answers to. So I'll hand it over to Robert Osborne, the Director of the Communications Division at the California Public Utilities Commission.
Thank you, Scott. I'm Robert Osborne, Director of the Communications Division, and joining me is Peter Pratt, who's the Senior Policy Advisor in the Communications Division. I want to thank Scott Adams and Cole Przybilla for their support and partnership in the IIJA process and for publicizing and hosting today's webinar on such short notice. The Broadband Equity Access and Deployment is a federal grant program that aims to get all Americans online by funding partnerships between states and territories, communities, and stakeholders to build broadband infrastructure where it's needed. The BEAD prioritizes unserved locations that have no internet access and have access that is under 25 megabits per second down and 3 megabits per second up for unserved, and then for underserved locations that are below 100 megabits per second down and 20 megabits per second up. I'm going to put up some slides and we'll go through those. That will be the basis for the presentation, and then afterwards we'll try and answer questions over the Q&A that you can type in. Here we go. And let's put that on. Cool. There we go. Can you all see the slides?
Yeah, Rob.
Peter, can you see the slides?
We can see them, Rob.
Excellent. Thank you. So California's allocation of the $42.3 billion from the National Telecommunications and Information Administration, so we'll get a fraction of that, hinges on the accuracy of the FCC's broadband map. And from the outset, both the NTIA and the FCC have been working under extremely tight deadlines. And in fact, in mid-August, Alan Davidson, who's the chief of the NTIA, announced that the release of the updated maps would be pushed out to the first half of 2023. So in preparation for the launch of the broadband map, the FCC created a robust library of web pages, reference documents, and links to decisions and instructional videos. And so what we're presenting to you today is based on that. The FCC published the map, the broadband map, on Friday, November 18th, which was a week before Thanksgiving. And so we wanted to act quickly to get the word out. The FCC is giving the public until January 13th to file challenges, and that's not a lot of time, and hence today's webinar. So
Director Osborne, not to interject, but I think your slides might be frozen.
Nope. We're digging into the disclaimer now, but thank you for raising that. Can you see that?
No, we're still on the title slide.
Oh, shoot. How about that?
Maybe unshare. Oh, there we go. Now we're good.
Okay. Apologies for that. And thank you, Cole, for raising that.
Yep.
And Rob, you might want to go to
All right.
slideshow presentation mode.
Okay. That was not slideshow presentation mode. Yeah, it actually was, but I think I'll just toggle back and forth. So before I go any further, I just want to state that these slides are an informal read on the FCC's availability challenge process, and they should not be seen as or read as a substitute or a replacement or in lieu of the FCC's rules, processes, and policies. Due to the extremely short timeline set by the FCC and the need expressed by both the FCC and the NTIA to get the word out about the map and the challenge process, the goal of today's webinar is to do just that, get the word out. So we strongly encourage those of you planning to engage with the FCC's broadband data to go directly to the large set of FCC resources they have provided to get answers to questions, including videos and frequently answered questions. So with that, we're going to dig into the overview, the agenda for today. We'll talk about the broadband map briefly. We'll go through the availability challenge process, validating locations versus validating services offered by providers, how to challenge locations on the map. There's the individual, bulk, and the crowdsourced challenges, and then finally a call to action. Okay, so the FCC's National Broadband Map. The data that's on the broadband map today that you view is data as of June 30th, 2020. This is provided by the internet service providers directly to the FCC. The Broadband Serviceable Location Fabric, otherwise known as the Fabric, is a common data set of all locations in the US where fixed broadband internet access is or can be installed. So that fabric is the sort of what I call the exoskeleton of the map, and then the broadband provider data is put on top of that. So the map shows location level information on broadband availability throughout the country. To improve the accuracy of the broadband map, the FCC began accepting challenges to the fabric information from providers, states, and local tribal governments in September. And I'll get into that a little later about the PUC's involvement. So what we have here is a screenshot of the broadband map, and this is for a specific location in Sacramento. You can do an address lookup. And when you do that, you get to see what providers are claiming to offer service at that location and at what speeds. Two things I want to point out here. This is a location-based map. This is data submitted as of June 30th this year. There's two things that you can see on the far right. You have location challenge and availability challenge, and we'll go into that in a bit. Okay, how to help improve the map. So if you think the information about the location point of your home or another location is wrong, you can submit a location challenge directly from the map. There's a tool in there that we'll go through. You can also submit a location challenge if you think a location is missing from the map. If you think the information on the map about which the internet service providers offer broadband service to your home or another location is wrong, you can dispute it by submitting an availability challenge. And we highlighted that earlier on that address lookup. And if you think the information on mobile coverage is wrong, and this is a key point, you can dispute that as well by taking the speed test on your mobile device with the FCC's speed test application. The results of these tests will be aggregated to create mobile challenges that the mobile providers must respond to improve their coverage maps. So the FCC map challenge process, and this is really, this timeline is really what we're doing at the CPUC. On November 4th, the PUC went through filing a bulk challenge with the FCC, and this is based on quite a number of weeks of going through the fabric itself and trying to determine what locations are missing or what locations are coded wrong, that sort of thing. And we discovered, I think we identified 40,000 locations, more than 40,000 locations that were either misidentified or missing. And we provided those to the FCC, and the FCC is currently reviewing it. Next, the location or availability challenge, to be accurate, they call it the availability challenge. That map was published on November 18th, and that is what we're talking about today. The due date for the availability challenge is January 13th, and that is open to designated states, cities, counties, and tribes. There's also an ability for non-government entities to also challenge. Obviously, public can challenge through an individual challenge, but we'll go into that also in a moment. Finally, why this all matters is that on the BEAD, the NTIA plans to announce the BEAD allocation. So California's fraction of that $42.3 billion will be based on the number of unserved locations. So that will be, I think the target date right now is June 30th. So this is an overview of the challenge process. So what is the challenge process? Well, there's different categories for challenges, but just at a very high level, the reported service is not offered, you can challenge that, or the reported speed is not available for purchase. Secondly, internet service provider, an ISP, if they denied a service request to you, so you ordered service and they said, sorry, we can't provide service to your address, or a demanded connection charges that exceeded standard installation charge. So they want, let's say, $1 million to install service at your home, and that exceeds what would normally be expected. That was another category. And then finally, if the service provider failed to schedule and perform an installation within 10 business days. Again, I want to qualify everything I'm saying here is my read, our read on the rules. Again, please consult the FCC's documentation for the final word on that. How do you challenge? So there's two types of challenges. There's the individual challenge, which we'll go through with the tool that's on the map. These will be accepted through January 13th. And then there's also bulk challenge. And this is for multiple locations. So these may be filed directly with the broadband data collection system, which is the FCC's web-facing or public-facing web tool. The bulk challenge validation methods have to be approved by the FCC and have to meet the format of the applicable data specification. So you need to use their formatting. And again, just like the individual challenge, the bulk challenges must be filed on or before January 13th. And then who, internet service providers, government entities, anchor institutions, community-based organizations, and individuals may file challenges. And we have a link down at the bottom for that. All right, so talking about individual challenge, we sort of touched upon this earlier. A missing location, so where consumer internet service is or could be available, but it's missing from the map. Misidentified location, so a location's broadband service is incorrectly identified. Third, incorrect information, the address or unit count for location is incorrect. Finally, incorrect placement on the map, so the geographic coordinates are wrong. This, I think, ties back to the actual fabric itself. Okay, as I indicated earlier, here's the screenshot I had earlier from the map. And we're going to go into the location and availability challenge. I think I skipped ahead here. This is the one I wanted to show. Apologies for that. This is the one. So the two boxes on the right, the red box, is location challenge and availability challenge. Okay, location challenge. So inside the map, when you click location challenge, that hyperlink that's included in when you do an address lookup, the first thing you'll see is a box popping up. And you'll see at the top, it says the address of the location that you've done these address search for, and will ask for your contact information. Below that, there's a challenge type. So in this case, for this specific address, and this address 770 L Street is different from the one I had earlier. The one earlier was, I think, 700 L Street, which actually had internet service providers listed. This one did not have any internet service providers listed. So in this case, it's only allowing me to do an incorrect location building type challenge. Next, on that same screen, you have the ability then, or you have to put in a description of the supporting documentation. So for instance, if the building was wrong, you want to put in documentation showing that the building should be located somewhere else, or in the event that the provider itself is claiming to offer service, but they don't, you need to provide some sort of documentation there. Again, This is our quick read on everything. We haven't had a lot of time to put this together. So again, I encourage you to go to the FCC's website to find out more information on how to do this. Next, we have, okay, and this finally is a certification. So this basically says that under penalty of perjury, you examine the information contained in the challenge, et cetera, et cetera. You certify that, submit it, and then the FCC then receives the challenge. And we'll get into that in a moment with regard to what constitutes a challenge versus what constitutes crowdsourced data. Okay, so we talked about location challenge, and we have availability challenge. Okay, that needs to come up here. Okay, for an availability challenge, here we have a different address, 806 L Street in Sacramento. It has a location ID and then it has a list of providers. So if, for instance, you say Space Exploration Holdings, we don't think they have service at this address. Now, when you say we don't think, that you need more than just that. It can't be a hunch. You need to have some sort of documentation showing that there's no service there. So for instance, you could have a denial of service, meaning you are a tenant in that building, you requested service from NGSO Satellite, and they said, we're sorry, we can't provide service to that address. So that would be documentation if you had an email or some sort of formal notification. So we go through this, and we select, in this case, we could select Hughes. Let's say you select that. Then you go ahead and submit the information associated with that specific availability challenge. Now we're going to go to bulk challenge, and I'm going to hand it over to Peter.
Thanks, Rob. I think my video is coming up. Cole, can folks see my video? There we go. Good afternoon, everyone. Yes, so all of the points that Rob has been making in the FCC new protocols and rules for challenges to the new national broadband map published on November 18th has been talking about individual challenges. For the last few slides here, I'm going to talk about the bulk challenge process. Think of the bulk challenge process as taking a huge Excel spreadsheet and sending it under certain terms, rules, and specifications, challenging what you see in the field, but on a bulk, many locations, rather than just your own location, a neighbors, family members, et cetera, et cetera. So categorically, the FCC says that any of us can make bulk challenges on these 7 or 8 different purposes. You'll see that they're very close to the individual challenge purposes that Rob described. It could be the provider says that service is available at a particular address and it isn't available, or it isn't available in a certain delivery schedule time, or the provider denied the request or service to begin with. So again, think of bulk challenges like individual challenges, first relating to what are the categories that those challenges are made in. Next slide, please, Rob. Right. So again, this is giving a little more categorization of what the bulk challenges can be all about. The FCC says we really want to see bulk challenges from entities that can prove their knowledge of the infrastructure, right? States, cities, counties, our consortia, others, you know, they want to know in broad strokes, no, that provider doesn't have infrastructure in that area. But as Rob said, based on the individual challenges, you got to prove that you don't know the infrastructure is there. What are your qualifications? Actually, on the state side, we have to have engineering expertise certificate our filings. Or a bulk challenge could also be collected from a variety of individual consumers. Again, the bulk submitter has to talk about their expertise and knowledge and the fact that they're speaking to the terms and specifications outlined by the FCC, but you can bring together individual complaints or challenges from individuals that you recognize, and you're essentially certifying what they say. As we say in the slide here, for bulk challenges, fixed speed tests are not accepted. We'll get into that in a moment and talk a little bit about speed testing and how the FCC looks at it in the current regimen of these rules. Next slide, please, Rob. Crowdsourced data. So again, crowdsourced data is more like bulk information because crowdsourced data can be aggregated and then uploaded to the FCC by a government, by a tribal entity, or I believe even by a provider or a carrier. So next slide, Rob, let's start to look at some of the definitions and terms for crowdsourced data. This slide tells us the critical difference that FCC is making between crowdsourced data and how each challenge within that has to meet certain criteria. As Rob says, we cannot say enough from the CPUC that we really urge you to go out and read the FCC rules, dig into them, and understand that they are defining things like the basic challenge, crowdsourcing, inherently different from the way many of us have described them or defined them in the past. Crowdsource is less formally recognized by the FCC, yet it is a more expansive way to submit data. It does not require a provider response, right? So it isn't verified by a provider saying, no, we disagree with that. But the FCC will use crowdsourced data as one of their tools for verifying provider provided information. Each challenge is sent to the challenged internet service provider, but again, crowdsourced data is not, so you can see the distinction there. Next slide, please, Rob. So with bulk crowdsourced categories, again, we have different categories that for the bulk filing to be accepted by FCC, for the individual crowdsource challenges to go in through the bulk challenge route, they have to meet, again, specific criteria. And you can see what they are here. Again, they're a little bit different from some of the other criteria, but most of them are essentially the same. The provider does not actually provide the speed at this person's location that that provider put on the national broadband map. So you can see that the national broadband map, again, published several weeks ago on November 18th, is the standard against which FCC is collecting all this challenge information to counter argue or correct or make more accurate that information is there. So again, if you're out there, if you're in a consortia, in a county, in a city, and you want to aggregate crowdsourced data, we can't urge you yet again enough to look at these criteria and make sure all of your crowdsourced challenges meet one or several of these specific criteria. Next slide, please, Rob. Again, this is a little more drill down on how you submit the bulk crowdsourced data. The reason it can be submitted for crowdsourced data, but not challenges, is the filers interested in sharing speed test results should use a particular code. So you can increment a bulk crowdsourced data filing with the FCC based on speed test information, but you have to code it in to your response. Again, it's, if you will, an electronic column on a big Excel spreadsheet, and that's the way the FCC is collecting this information. So the actual speed of the service does not match the advertised speed. So remember, that goes back to our criteria, but in the bulk crowdsource submissions, you have to code that. By the way, CPUC has fairly extensive experience with this. We had to do this for our fabric challenges already. So we have experience in the round of FCC response data that's already been solicited and accepted. Next slide, please, Rob, on speed testing. Again, we wanted to urge everyone joining us today and everybody digging into the regs going forward of the FCC, that the FCC does not look at speed test information at quite the same level of verification credibility of the previous types of bulk and individual feedback. Fixed broadband speed test data are part of crowdsourced data, not challenge data, except for mobile. As Rob said, there's a separate group of testing regimes and protocol for mobile. Mobile tests do not relate to California's coming allocation under the BEAD program, but there are other FCC and other programs that we would like to see mobile speed tests go in, but just we wanted to point out and underline that they are on a different scale. They are for a different level of analysis by FCC. Fixed broadband speed testing compares the measured speed to the subscribed speed address, as basically as the slide says, for truth in advertising. Right now, we're not fully sure how the FCC will rate speed test data. Is there a numeric input? Are there a series of metrics? Read the regulations and try to figure that out yourselves. But just to know, speed test data will not be the final arbiter of what is challenged and what is validated as a challenge against the national broadband map. Next slide, please, Rob. This slide gives you a little look at the two main buckets, if you will, of challenge data that the FCC is accepting. As Rob mentioned, we at the CPUC on November 4th submitted over 40,000 corrections to the FCC for the basic fabric challenge. The fabric, as Rob mentioned, is the new protocol for address-specific accuracy of the new broadband maps. It's called the Broadband Serviceable Location Fabric. And at the CPUC, we crunched numbers along with our contractor at Chico State, and we submitted over 40,000 corrections to the fabric alone. New York submitted about 30,000. And so what we said is, hey, FCC, we think that you missed some locations in rural areas primarily that should actually have a broadband serviceable location, but you don't have it on the map. That is distinct from what we're talking about today. The bulk availability challenge is where we say we want to validate, as the public, as governments, as state government, we want to validate through bulk filings and individual filings what the providers say they have in broadband around the state of California. And again, we do that as a bulk level in many thousands of validation submissions at the CPUC. We hope that you as groups out in cities and counties submit as many possible individual challenges. And if you have the technical wherewithal, certainly roll those up into bulk availability challenges as we hope we've been describing. Next slide, please, Rob. This gives you a little background of, again, why are we doing this? Why is this trip necessary? As Rob and the FCC and so much in the literature tells us today, what this is all about is getting California's fair share of that $42.5 billion in the Infrastructure Act available for all states and territories in our country. California certainly will be one of the largest states in terms of our BEAD allocation, but there's nothing that guarantees that today. California has very high cost areas in mountains, in forested areas. We want to get every dollar that should be coming to us proven that indeed it should be coming to us so that we can serve all of the unserved areas, particularly in these high-cost rural areas that are a real challenge for California and for other Western states that many states in our country, quite frankly, don't have. You can take a look at this slide as we circulate the slide deck later, but just to show you what we in state government are doing, we are working closely with the NTIA, with the FCC on every milestone you see here. The most recent one, back in August, we submitted the first application for the planning grant for the BEAD program, and we expect to hear good news about our application, hopefully in a matter of days, and that sets us off on the continuing effort to apply for money in the BEAD program. You can take a look at this as we circulate the slide deck after today. Next slide, please, Rob. Thanks. What we really wanted to impress on all of you, and we see over 106 people joining us today. We greatly appreciate all the time you're spending with us. We really want you to see this as a call to action. You can help us. It isn't just state government talking to the feds about California should get this, send us the money. This is all about reaching out to your families, to your constituents, to folks working with you on broadband, to really go into the individual and bulk challenge processes so that you can let the FCC know, no, we don't think there's service there where you say there is. Providers can make mistakes. They can overstate or understate what's out there. It's really up to all of us as residents of California to go into that FCC link, go into their tool that we'll look at in a moment to really put in the information in either bulk or individual filings. Next slide, please, Rob. And if you haven't seen it before, here's a screenshot of the FCC new national broadband map. You can go right into that link there, call it up. And what's on top of our screenshot on the map is the tool set that you can work through to issue your individual challenge. Put your address in there. Put an address in of a location you know doesn't have broadband in our state today. Increment the information that the FCC asks for. You have to make a statement that this is your best belief that you're making a true statement, that there's no service here or it can't be provided, et cetera, in those particular test areas that Rob described, and go ahead and file that. We're hoping that tens, if not hundreds of thousands of our fellow Californians do that over the next several weeks. The deadline to do this right now is January 13th. So if thousands of our fellow Californians go in and use this tool that the FCC gives us, we will have a better shot at getting the money, the funding from Washington that we know we deserve. Next slide, please, Rob. Again, this is a little way into, this is a screenshot and some information from that screenshot of the FCC's portal to do bulk challenges. It's the same portal that we in state government use to register tens of thousands of locations, as we did for the fabric, as we will for availability. But work through this, put your information together in those categorical areas that we mentioned. And when you're ready to go, sign into this portal. Again, you'll see a link in a moment how you access this, and follow the instructions, and you upload using this bulk challenge portal. Last slide, please, Rob. Lastly, we wanted to give you all of these resources, and believe me, the documentation that our federal colleagues at the FCC have gone through just over the last half year goes into the hundreds pages of documentation. These are our choices of the easiest, most accessible guides that you can get to go in and see how the FCC is suggesting you go through this process should you want to. We're really recommending, if you're in local government at a city or a county, try to at least see what you can do here. If you're in a consortia, if you're in a county government, spread the word, get the word out there about this input tool, because it's really will be of great assistance to the state. We're partners of yours in getting this done and letting the federal government have the most accurate position and view of California that we know they want to have. So that's it for us now. I believe, Rob, we want to take Q&A. I'll throw it back to you.
Thank you, Peter. So I think we've got a number of questions on here, and let's see, we'll pull those up. I'll just work off from the top to the bottom. First question is, are there plans for a coordinated challenge with this group on behalf of, in coordination with California state and local entities? So the quick answer to that is no, and part of the reason is that's why we're having this webinar, so that you can file challenges individually through your own efforts, and this portal is set up to do that. The second question is, can you share any typologies of locations that were frequently misidentified per the CPUC's findings, ADUs, small businesses, etc.? Peter, do you have any recollection in the report for, I think there were categories that we have in the report that some categories were actually fairly frequently misidentified.
Yes, Rob, thanks for that, and thanks to the questioner. Yes, in our fabric filing of the 40,000 plus fabric challenges that we filed, many of them were small business locations and what we believe and know to be occupied housing units in rural areas that were not picked up by this generation of the fabric. So I don't have the report in front of me. Contact the CPUC if you would like to see the individual breakout for that, but I believe that was mostly what we found. Locations that we know are serviceable broadband locations that were not shown on the fabric.
Thank you, Peter. The next question sort of ties into that. The question says, it seems that MDU units, so multi-dwelling units, are undercounted. What method did you use for MDU locations? Is there something communities can do to support these efforts?
Yes, I would say, and we have been in frequent discussion with our federal partners at the FCC on that point, because clearly it's important for California. Rob and I and others were discussing this just earlier this week. It is a quirk, personal opinion being expressed here, in the current fabric that all multiple dwelling units in the United States are shown as, I believe, still one location, right? So a state like our own, a state like Illinois, New York, that has many multiple dwelling units. Certainly, we are disadvantaged if there are MDUs in our major cities, in our rural areas that are counted that way, if they don't have broadband in them, if they're not truly, if they're truly unserved. So we're working through that with FCC and hoping that FCC will give us another bite at the apple to correct either in the rules or in the fabric how that appears.
Thank you, Peter. Next question is, how will FCC verify and recertify these challenges?
The FCC uses two terms. They're called validation and verification. And if you read through all the regulations like we do, you'll see that there are slightly different definitions of what they mean by that. But in general, all of this information flooding back onto the national broadband map, FCC will use certain tests as to what types of information will change a location from being stated as served by a provider to underserved, which will then be eligible for BEAD funding. So they have a variety of tests. Again, as you saw from some of our slides, they place a lot of credibility on knowledge of the infrastructure. State governments are supposed to have knowledge of the infrastructure. Counties, cities can, our consortia can make a statement through the validation process. We know there's not infrastructure there to serve these housing units, these small businesses at that stated service level.
Thank you, Peter. Next question is, the January 13th map data will be used for federal BEAD allotments to the states. Will California use the same version of the map for allocations to regions and counties within the state, or will municipalities have more time to identify errors in ISP self-reported data? I'm going to take a stab at that first. So the quick answer on the BEAD map. So the BEAD map will determine the allocations, yes. And then subsequent to that, PUC will be opening a proceeding to put together program rules for the BEAD. So the BEAD will have a subgrantee program to award money to entities for last mile broadband development. The basis for that award program will be a map that we have in California. It will derive from the federal map data, but we will go through a validation process. So that's validation in addition to what we are doing right now for the FCC. So I hope that answers the question. I don't know, Peter, if you have anything to add.
Thank you, Rob. I would absolutely concur with that. And again, this is all about states like us at the CPUC maintaining communication with the FCC on exactly these points. California has one of the oldest state broadband capital subsidy programs in our country, and FCC has been sometimes a little behind the times in recognizing these state programs and aligning their rules with ours. So will there ever be one map, if you will? Frankly, some of us hope there will be for ease of funding and grantsmanship. But again, we're in an interactive relationship with another level of government. And again, this particular FCC, personal opinion, has been nothing but cooperative with us around these issues. But these are major issues to bring into alignment at this time.
Thank you, Peter. Next question is, will this recording of this presentation be available? And I think the answer is yes. This is being recorded, and I think Department of Technology will be putting a link up on their website. Next is, does the cost of pulling high-speed fiber to an address on the map factor into a challenge? And if so, how? Peter, do you know how to answer that?
Thanks, Rob, and thanks to the questioner. No, the cost of serving a unserved location does not define how the FCC defines it as served or unserved. That's kind of logical. But the questioner is raising a very valid point, and I would say the questioner has probably read into the BEAD regulations, because in the BEAD regulations, we in state government have to define what the FCC and NTIA call extremely high cost locations in California. So absolutely, questioner, the cost of pulling that fiber to that location, we have to say to the NTIA, we think, you know, these 5,000, these 10,000 locations in California are above an extremely high cost threshold because pulling fiber to those will be cost prohibitive, perhaps, and again, back to the BEAD allocation. And for those locations, we, the state of California, are recommending to NTIA they be classified as extremely high cost. And at that point, they show as different for BEAD allocation numbers, but their status on the FCC map is not changed in terms of served or unserved.
Thank you, Peter. Next question is, will the CPUC make available the bulk fabric challenge and the approach so that we don't need to duplicate the effort? And yes, we will be publishing that. We have a BEAD webpage up. I will share that link later. We don't have it up. We don't have the bulk challenge information there yet because we're still waiting for the FCC to verify our bulk challenge. But once we have that reply from the FCC, we'll be happy to put that up on the website for people to go through and see what was challenged and what was accepted. Next, will the CPUC confirm and verify the published speed with existing providers? So just to reiterate the point I made at the beginning of the presentation, this presentation is really intended to get the word out about the availability challenge process. The PUC will be working on filing a location challenge or an availability challenge as well, but we are not going to be verifying speeds for the entire state as part of that process. Next question. Did you use the data ISPs provide yearly to the CPUC in the broadband filings to report missing addresses in the fabric? What other sources were used? Peter, do you want to take that?
Yes, thanks, Rob. We used a variety of sources along with our contractor at Chico CSU, and those are standard parcel maps, address maps from the counties. And yes, as the questioner said, are data that we verify from carriers and providers in California on an annual basis. Absolutely. So if we saw something in the fabric that did not line up with what we know to be a valid location, we put a challenge in that.
Thank you. The next question is, does the CPUC have an issue with challenges from counties or cities that may duplicate what CPUC has already submitted? The answer very quickly to that is no, we do not. We don't have a lot of time to do this. And I'm really happy that all of you have joined this call. That's why we're encouraging everyone to get involved. There's just not enough time to go through and try and reconcile things. So I think we need to all just get involved and jump on this. So I hope that answers the question on that. Next is CPC leading its own bulk challenge of the availability data? And if so, how is it coordinating with local governments? So we're working on a bulk challenge based on the data that we've collected. And again, the reason we're doing this call is to engage local governments to submit their own bulk challenges or individual challenges. Next, what is the best way to challenge the advertised broadband speeds shown on the FCC map? What forms of data can be used to build a challenge apart from crowdsourced data? Peter, do you want to take that?
Yes. Questioner, as we saw in Rob's portion of the slide deck, the individual challenge where you go into the FCC National Broadband Map and you state an address, and then you state, I have a challenge against this. I wasn't given service. Service is not at its advertised or stated speed on the map. That is the individual approach. And then if you're a group, a county government, a city government, you can aggregate those types of feedback that you have from your constituents, from your neighbors, and you can feed it in through the bulk challenge process. Again, we are getting calls from cities and counties saying it's kind of a daunting process. And again, as Rob has said, and we've all said from the get-go, we wish we had another 6 months here on the front end of this. So try to make a bulk challenge if you have a lot of aggregated data coming in. Otherwise, probably the best advice is to have your neighbors, your constituents go into the FCC map and put in those individual challenges.
Thank you, Peter. Next question is, will the slides be available after the meeting? Answer is yes. Next, will the recorded webinar be posted? Yes, we've answered that. Next, can you share the 46,000 fabric challenges so we don't, okay, we've answered that one. Next, a fixed wireless provider claims to cover much of LA County with 1 gigabit per second symmetrical service. We have serious doubts about the provider's ability to achieve the speeds at scale. Do you have recommendations on how best to dispute? So that's a great question, and that is something that we will be looking at for the bulk availability challenge process. So if you have a way, as Peter has described, to challenge that data, that meets the FCC's criteria, we encourage you to do that. We will also be looking at that as well, where there's large areas. And I'm sorry, I'm moving quickly through this because we only have 5 minutes left. Next, please explain how or if the process affects the CPC interactive broadband map. Is the goal eventually to combine the results of both maps into a singular map? This is a great question, and it's something that we've been working through in the past couple of weeks. We have a number of work streams right now on the GIS front, Geographic Information Systems. And so the interactive map today is that you see today for California is based on December 2020 data. We've been in the process of trying to gather data based on December 2021. We've gotten some pushback from providers. We are still working through that. We hope to have that data set complete and validated, by the end of January of this next year. That's an aggressive timeline given the delays that we've had in collecting the data. So I don't have an answer to you on the broadband map, but it's something that we're definitely looking at. Next, I put 36 Main Street, Isleton, California into the broadband map, and it shows a number of residential locations with several providers reporting to provide certain speeds. Are you saying that if I encourage residents to complete a speed test at that location or others, and the results show that the speeds are not achieved, it will be useful to the CPUC? So the answer to that is not necessarily. The speed test, as we said earlier, goes into the crowdsourced category, not into the challenge category. Secondly, this is for the FCC's map. So what we're really trying to do here is have people look at the FCC's map and basically to determine if the data is accurate. And in the individual case, it looks like you did look up an address. If you have, reason to believe that this is inaccurate, then please submit a challenge. Next, the MDUs I've looked at in Fresno show a count 1, 2, 3. It's often wrong. This can be a huge differentiator versus other states with high density MDUs. Peter, do you want to take that?
Thanks, Rob. Yes, questioner, as I mentioned previously, and Rob and our other colleagues well know, we've been spending a lot of time with FCC on this. It is a factor of the way the fabric was developed nationally that each MDU right now only shows as one location. So we're trying to make sure, again, that California gets its fair share by better defining that.
Thank you. Next question relates to the what I call the vintage of the California broadband map and how it differs from what's on the FCC broadband map. And the simple answer to that is the California broadband map, as I said earlier, is based on December 2020 data. The broadband map for the FCC is based on June 2022. So there is a difference in time. So they're not comparable really. Next, if so, the FCC test is the one to complete. I think that relates to the FCC mobile test. I'm going to assume that that's what the question relates to. So yeah, for a mobile challenge, the FCC's mobile testing app is the one to use. That's the one they recognize. Next, if we challenge by region, is there a protocol you would recommend that we use when submitting our rebuttal to the FCC maps? Peter?
Yes, thanks, Rob. I would personally recommend a bulk challenge and you know, have a small group of folks go through those FCC regs very closely, look at the specifications. Your data set has to be in certain specifications and fields to make it even acceptable. If you're county government, if you're city, come in through one of our emails into the CPUC, and we'll attempt to help you with that as we have the resources to do that.
Thank you, Peter. And we have 1 minute left. Which filters within the FCC map most accurately estimate CSF, federal funding account, and BEAD? Okay, so the answer to that is there are no filters in the FCC map to estimate CSF or the federal funding account. Those are being handled at the state level. So for now, the activity we're asking you to engage in relates to the FCC's map, which ties into the BEAD allocation. So we've just gotten a number of other questions, and unfortunately we are out of time. So I want to thank you all for your participation in the call today. It's been very, very invigorating, and I'm really excited to see so many people engaged. So thank you again, and I'll hand it back to Cole.
Thanks, Rob. We'll wrap it up. Appreciate CPUC providing such valuable information to everyone and for them participating. Cole, we can close the meeting now.